So let's get started. So this presentation is about CSR and GRC, which is being replaced by ESG. So this is a quick details of mine, which you can look at from the video subsequently if you need to get details of this. I will take when we do the question and answers, I'll get the video on so that we can chat one-on-one. It's primarily a presentation, so let me go through this. So I need to cover a lot of ground in an hour because this is an awareness program on ESG. So it's just to give you a quick overview. I'd like you to focus on the headlines of each slide, the top of the slide, rather than the rest of the content. You can go over that in detail or get in touch with us for more information. So the focus really is on the headlines of each of the slides that I have. And they're divided into about 8, 9, 10 different topics in ESG. So each person will be interested in a very different aspect of ESG. So I'm not going to go into too much detail in the program itself. So keep your eyes open for the headline. Each of the so the focus is on the headlines, like I said. So I will be moving fast. Now, please make notes. If you have a pen and paper, please keep that handy so that I've got a page number happening. So we are now on page 3. So if you have questions, you can just make a note of it, page and reference, and I can always go back and look at it, or we can answer these questions subsequently. This is not a one-off ESG. We are going to be doing this more often. We have social media groups on YouTube, WhatsApp. There are a number of videos. So we're going to be developing on this ESG right down to implementation. So we have already had a bit of an outage this morning. So we've lost a couple of minutes. So if the power does go off, it will be back in a couple of minutes. So please wait if you have an interruption during this program. Okay, I want to start it off on a lighter side for the skeptics perhaps, and then it should be all upside from there. So in a lighter vein, what is ESG? With every tree we plant, we offset some of the carbon from all the hot air we produce, talking about how sustainable this makes us. So this is a pun around sustainability. Then what do you think our most powerful renewable source is? This definitely is denial. There's quite a bit of denial globally at national level to state and to local levels. A third tongue-in-cheek is, what the heck is this panda doing in the Arctic? He says, I'm a polar bear with a tan. So that's just to get us off onto a lighter vein. Now, let's look at a summary of ESG in the next 7 slides. I want to capture for those who may have to leave earlier or get the gist of this whole program in the first few minutes. So over the next slides, you'll get a summary, ESG summary. So what does ESG mean? So there are 3 broad aspects which are being brought together: the environment, social, and governance. This is, you can see that the governance is being replaced from the earlier GRC component. The CSR is being replaced with the social component, and the environment has gained ground to be the dominant factor in all of this. So we will be getting into more details of what each of these includes going forward in one of the more detailed slides. So these are the 3 aspects, and almost everything for corporate governance, social, and environment is now covered in this. Now, what's the difference between CSR and ESG? A lot of you are familiar with CSR, so there is still some confusion in the industry around these terms. CSR approval from governments is not forthcoming that easily, but it's going to move towards ESG. So understanding the difference between how CSR is being implemented and how ESG will be implemented going forward is something which has to be understood. The investment spectrum is moving forward. We had socially responsible investing at the earlier stages, which became CSR. Now there's a lot of talk about impact investing. Investors are interested in specific areas of investment, and this is going to move forward further into the ESG space. So this is a spectrum by which the CSR is going to get replaced by ESG over time, and ESG is much more monetary driven because of greenhouse gases, carbon credits, and the financials which go into ESG-based financing and investments. Let's go into that subsequently. So what are ESG companies? ESG companies are those that would help the investors' business points to NVIDIA as a great example of a company with proactive ESG initiatives. So NVIDIA had an agency helping them. So a board-level nominating and governance committee that oversees ESG issues, looking into all aspects of ESG as your partner. So as a ESG partner, companies may be needed to help you move towards this. And once you have a positive rating, these things become, I mean, it helps your brand value, market value, valuation as you go forward in this space. Okay. So why is ESG important for risk and compliance managers? There is, it's happening, it's continuing to happen. A mandated standardized ESG disclosure framework is on the books, but it's going to become certifiable standards going forward. We'll go into some of the various aspects that are working towards this. There is a competition between standards, between countries, between different industries. So we will go into what are the emerging risk and compliance issues around ESG. So why is ESG important for risk managers? So environmental, social, and governance impact risk management is in several critical ways. Banks ask for more detailed questions about ESG risks when considering lending. This is already happening. Point two, if investors and lenders can see that your companies run well and effectively and you're following the ESG principles, then obviously the trustworthiness, reliability, and longevity of the company can also improve. There's also a risk with losing investors due to lack of ESG awareness, because some of investors, second round funding, subsequent funding may be dependent on your ESG track record. So these are some of the important reasons why you should use a risk-based assessment to help with your ESG. Now, this has been said often, but it's starting to get implemented. What are the business benefits of sustainability? So there are several of them. Depending on your company, you could tick off one or two or more, which is applicable to you. So this could be your vision or goal for as you implement ESG, what do you expect from the ESG, returns on ESG, any investments in ESG as you go into this. And how you get done is the last 7th point in the summary, where what are ESG ratings, what are ESG frameworks, what is ESG software. So these components and tools will help you implement and monitor and manage it. There is a little bit of granularity and in the environment calculations, especially. For example, if you are running a bus service, the carbon footprint, how do you calculate it? So for each bus, each kilometer. So at that level, standards are emerging as to which way those components will be calculated and uploaded and acceptable to authorities, which we will get into this. So these frameworks and software and ratings help you have that credibility in the marketplace. So now let's get into a little bit more of the ESG nitty-gritty. So as I said, please ignore all these details. This is something which you can go back and look into it later, getting into how a circular economy can be established. So it's, I mean, companies talk about product lifecycle management, customer lifecycle returns. So including all production, supply chains, which have to be end-to-end. Customer relationships essentially have to be, again, circular end-to-end. So you have to think of any system, any company being involved in any business as a comprehensive end-to-end circular system. So a circular economy, which expands from a small local purchase and supplies to community level, to state level, country level, to global levels. So everywhere there has to be a circular system that is being implemented. Now, some of the ESG terms, these are terms you will come across. As I said, some of them are emerging to become bigger and larger and more acceptable standards, but each of these which you see has a role to play at this point in time. And the legacy will always be there. We still have the old protocols, the old ways of doing things which are still acceptable. So CSR will be around for a little while till any future implementation comes. But right to the other end, where you have human capital, sustainable value creation. So many companies are got into S&P has an ESG rating system. We'll go into some of the companies which have these. So these are the different players and standards and some of the taxonomy centered around ESG, which is emerging. The UN's Sustainable Development Goals, there are 17 of them. And if you look at it as a company, each company, some of it will be applicable, some of them will not be applicable, but a lot of statutory rules, compliance is going to be centered around the United Nations and what's being adapted worldwide, globally. So these are things that you have to keep in mind So a lot of the CSR activities could fall into that, and ESG activities are definitely going to be falling more widely across the spectrum of 17 sustainable goals established by the United Nations. Now, if you look at a survey of 2021 risks, there were the top 10 risks. If you look on the left, as we see that each of those 10 risks, business interruption going down to political violence as being the 10th risk. And each of these risks have a human factor, which can be brought into the social aspect. There's a governance factor, and then there's an environment factor. So if you look at the top 10 risks, each and all of them fall into the ESG spectrum. So a focus on ESG and then breaking it down into each of the areas that you would like to manage your risks, mitigate those risks, and control them is important to understand, so that ESG becomes the focus for almost every aspect of risk going forward. Now, if you look at climate change, I will go into climate change a little bit more. There's a global perception. Then there's also the reality of what's happening. That could be debatable. What is real? What's not real? What's acceptable? What's not acceptable? But carbon emissions are growing, and I want to share that some of the data in subsequent slides as well. What's happening country-wise? So there's data on this. If you want to go back and look at it, so you can see that without getting into specifics, who are the larger carbon emission countries. Versus also per capita. So per capita also becomes important because if it is human cause, then you have to look at the per capita emissions of as people. So it's debatable which metric you'll go. There could be other metrics, but this is always a point of argument. The bigger picture is you can see the visual on the right side. So 70 gigatons according to IPCC for the next 50 years. 50 to reduce and 20 to recapture or abatement. So you have to reduce from the 70 gigatons. So this is some of the global goals for climate change that have been set up. And there is a price for the tons. So a per ton of reduction at this point is USD $275, which can change over time. It can become higher or less. So this is the metric, the key metric that is going to be used for carbon capture. So if you look at sustainability, top of mind, this is another survey which we have details on here, which what CEOs are talking about. And you can see that, again, like the top 10 risks, a lot of them are centered around back to ESG factors. So again, you can go back and look at this and go over this. So companies are establishing a vision and a mission statement such as this, embedding green values and greening trade skills to institutionalize green economy. So the focus in this case is to improve trade skills and embedding these values and green values into organization, not only organizations and businesses, but into the community and into the industry at a geographic level or at an industry vertical horizontal level. So let's look into getting a little bit more detail. So some of the aspects of ESG that you could focus on, it's a very large, as you can see, every company, all organizations, all businesses, global, state, centers, every business has to get into this. So it starts breaking up into some of these. Within the ESG itself, the focus could be on environment, social is a separate issue, and governance. A lot of you have been working on a lot of social issues outside. NGOs have been doing a lot more work in the social space, but that's trying to become more mainstreamed by corporates. Governance issues are difficult. Most of it is centered around board oversight and board management. We'll get into a little bit more details about governance aspects. But the environment is something which is proving a faster and quicker and a bigger downslide for most people. So how to go about the E part is my own personal focus, and I will spend more time on the E aspect of that. So ratings, evaluation, monitoring and verification, ESG frameworks, disclosure standards and options, reporting, investment impacts, investing CSR, green investment, ESG metrics, low carbon versus net zero emissions. I mean, there are two ways here: not to emit at all versus reducing it. Again, there's a lot of debate around this and technical issues, which we can discuss separately. ESG green values and moving towards an ESG culture, which is the best of all, where it becomes a way of life that you are involving environment, social and governance issues at a personal, individual level, which can expand into team, corporate, community, state, wider levels. So these are some of the topics that may be of specific interest to each of you, and we can focus on each of these in subsequent seminars. So broadly, this is what the environment includes: climate change, energy management, environmental impact of product portfolio. Each of the products that you bring will have different supply chains, different factors. Environment management, water use in sourcing, natural resources, biodiversity, waste management, emissions, green cover, coastal erosion, soil replenishment, especially if you're an industrial company, if you're in mining or you're in transport, some of these become very key and central issues to your industry. For example, in the IT industry, you'd think IT industry uses a lot of power. So one of the cooling, cooling, air conditioning, those factors. And today the blockchain is supposed to be using up as much CO2 as any other technologies. So in implementing blockchain, there is a huge carbon footprint that's happening. So every industry is affected by the environment. The social is something everybody has been working on this: health issues, safety issues, bias and diversity issues, human capital, human rights, parity, salary, wages parity, data privacy, employee rights, customer satisfaction. These are some of the issues that fall under the S category, or the S category within the ESG space. Governance, business ethics, compliance, risk management, disclosure and reporting, monitoring and verification, board composition and structure, shareholding rights, executive compensation, decision-making, business rules, tax transparency, anti-bribery, whistleblower handling. So all these are governance issues which have been grouped together under the G category. So while E, S, and G there may be some overlap in terms of people and handling, there is a distinct difference between the three pillars. So again, it's a repeat of some of the things that we have sent, but it's just put in a different format. So there would be things that could be added to this or removed. It's not exhaustive, but it gives you the three pillars of the ESG. So let's look at governance and ethics quickly. So this is a quick take on the governance. We are all familiar with, we can question the data and the sources of data and other things, but broadly, people will agree that this is broadly the way the global governance index falls. Those who have low governance versus higher governance, and it does make a difference and is linked to politics, democracy, human rights, and there's a whole set of issues that affect a governance issue. So these are some of the governance issues that you can look at. And if it comes back to governance, that you can also have bad governance. So what we're looking for is good governance, and in that sense, it goes back to ethics and values. So are you making the decision just because the law requires it, or because it has ethics? So it's not just a question of compliance and following the law, but it's also ethics, and you have to bring these two fairly disparate views together and then make your decisions based on a combination of law and ethics. So on one hand, you're forced to do certain things because of compliance and statutory needs, but on the other hand, it's up to you. There is voluntary in terms of disclosure, transparency, risk aversion or risk appetite is wholly your decision. Tax avoidance is something which somebody takes a decision to do, quite most often than not. It's deliberate. So lies, fake news, all that is all adding to the current mix of ethics. So this is extending that same point further. So if you can look at it as the yin and yang, or the trust, antitrust, closed or open systems, mentor. So these are the ethics issues that come up. So decision making, all these become factors to your leadership and governance factors, from the board level to the top management level, mid management, even to supervisory, how decisions are taken at the operational level as well. So these are whistleblower factors which we can look at ethical leadership. So more on this. As I said, you can just look at go back and look at this video later, and you can get into this. It's also important that those who don't want to do it will find excuses, and there are enough excuses for, like we saw in the earlier cartoon, to start with. So denial is a major factor with ESG. You can ignore the science, you can ignore the facts, you can ignore the data, but that's only going to, you're only kicking the ball down the road for a problem coming in the future. So you can again go back and see how you can avoid these excuses. So this is an overlap of ethics, how the social, economic, environmental, governance issues overlap in terms of ethics. So for example, food safety comes, food security. I mean, we're talking about organic. The whole point of organic is supposed to be transparency and less fakes and counterfeits and food poisoning and other factors that creep up because of pesticides and other use. So you're looking at the reasons why organic may be perceived to be better is because of some of the problem governance issues in the supply chain for food. So one of the factors that come up is ESG ratings. So a number of organizations have got into this ESG rating. So these are the MSCI ESG ratings as of June 2021. And these become factors for investment and being able to draw investment. So maintaining an ESG rating is going to become more and more important. There are a number of rating agencies that will drift away into maybe one or two. So that will emerge over time. At this point in time, there are a few leading ESG rating companies. For example, NVIDIA is touted as having one of the best ratings in the world at the moment for a variety of reasons. And you can see that. So there are a number of articles that shows that investors, Wall Street and ESG investors are interested in NVIDIA as being one of the top companies with good ESG. Infosys in India has one of the leading TCS. Infosys have a report, have an ESG disclosure report, which is also available. And post this call, if you want to, I can share that with you. If any of you are interested, you can send a mail to me on the Infosys, which is a public document available. Likewise, Tata has also started spending a lot of money on ensuring that they are compliant to ESG standards, and as and when more standards emerge, they will adhere to it. So that's happening with the Tatas. So one of the rating agencies may go similar to CRISIL or other ratings. So you have the CC, CBB. This is typical rating systems. So a leader could be a AAA, while a laggard would be a CCC. So this is a typical rating system which is used. So working on your rating system and moving that up is important. This is another ESG rating, which again goes back to that ESG pillars. So you take the three pillars in the middle. You can see that the social pillar, the governance pillar, and the environment pillar. So each of them can be broken up. The governance pillars. So these are the factors used by one rating agency to arrive at the score, your ESG score. So if you have this in front of you, you could use these to take decisions to ensure that you have a good ESG rating. Anyway, all this is good business practice. It's best practice. So you would be doing most of this. It's just that you would like to bin them in the right place and put a metric to it so that you can use this in your organization. So that's just a text of the previous screen. So you can go back and say how this could be one method of doing your rating. So this also differs from sector to sector. Some are environmentally exposed, some businesses are socially exposed, and some businesses are more governance exposed. So this industry-wise, sector-wise risk also allows you to benchmark yourself against other businesses in your vertical or horizontal. So sector-wise risk. This is a summary of how that emerges. One of the key factors we'll go into this is the carbon emissions, carbon dioxide, CO2 emissions, equivalents. So we talk about the equivalents. Other things don't matter as much when you look into a technical session. The equivalents means carbon CO2 is the main factor. So transportation has a factor of 29%, while agriculture has only a 9%. Commercial and residential is 12%. So you can see how different industries will be affected just inherently because of the business itself. So obviously the more investment going into transportation is going to look at the ESG factor, and a little bit less in agriculture relative to this slide. So here's a way that the weightage is distributed between the E, the S, and the G. So you can see that the weightage, if assuming total is 100%, so you can immediately see that in materials, the environment and governance is more important. The social is not that important because you may not be in your towns or cities or people directly impacted by it. So the social might not be 0, but it's at least in the slide, the weightage is given is a 0 for this particular ranking. And conversely, you can see that in the case of utilities, it's mostly social and governance. The environment factor is again seems to be near 0, but that's how the investment weightages work broadly. So event risk versus erosion risk. Okay, so environmental erosion versus an event happening. So you can see that how this again, you can come back and spend a little bit of time and understand how this falls into these different quadrants when you find the time to come back and look at it. Now, every city has got a circle of sustainability. You can see that what I mean by circle, this is a worldwide thing which has been done for many cities. Some cities have a scorecard like this. I've just gone ahead. I'll go back and tell you. So it looks like economics, ecology, politics, and culture. And these are the factors around which such a map is drawn. And you're able to rate a city. So we have seen these city ratings. So there are city ratings like this. So this will affect, for example, any drawing of investment into metro rail services or electric vehicles or anything green. If you're looking for sustainability and using these, and I know which city to invest in, it will also help investors as to which cities are worth investing in for neither the good nor bad, but depending on where the most impact may be in each of these cities. So it's the good clean ones may not draw investment. Conversely, the ones with poor records may draw investment. So this helps you understand what are the circles of sustainability. So if you look at the ESG finance, so climate financing by multilateral development banks, it's new records. So there's a fair amount of money starting to happen in smart energy, into windmills, solar, and I mean, an investor could look at this as a back of a napkin way of where to put the money when it comes to ESG. Negatives are weapons makers are a negative, but fair labor practices is a positive. Board diversity is a positive, while excessive compensation is a negative. Polluters would be a negative. So these are ways, a simple way that an ESG investor might look at your organization. And there's a lot of money starting to happen. So under ESG, there's a huge amount of assets being moved into an ESG portfolio, as you can see by the numbers that are emerging. The ESG opinion is investing today is somewhere between a joke and a scam. It's getting better. That's the point. Not that it's there right now, but it's definitely getting. One of the touch points could be later on this year, the COP26 in Glasgow in November. More of granularity and detail may emerge from this. So sustainability investing has exploded since the signing of the Paris Agreement, but is seriously flawed. There are no universal rules for ESG risks or clear frameworks to police ESG products. Part of the solution is to put a price on the E. Okay, so that's something which I'm going to spend a little bit more time in the next 5-10 measures to show you how we can arrive at the calculation for it. So disclosure is the first way. As I said, Infosys, Tata have started disclosure. So you start disclosing. It's completely voluntary at this point. Nobody's forcing you to do anything. But disclosure and reporting is going to become a key factor. So these are some of the, you may be familiar with some of these disclosure standards. So you could choose one or more depending on where you are and which industry, acceptability to a particular industry. Advice on this can also be shared on a need basis for each industry. So some of the standard setters for ESG and ESG frameworks. So the key ones are what we saw on the earlier slide. So if you want a little bit more detail on this, you could go back and please look at this. Also, if you can share a mail with us, we'll share this PDF with you subsequently. So these are some of the current issues with reporting and disclosure. Again, as you get into, if you're getting into disclosure and framework, these key points will help you in arriving at your disclosure and reporting. So what's happening on the climate change, the international agreements, Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, Even with this, there was a lack of clarity on the earlier protocol, and the upcoming COP26 in Glasgow, November, will post that. We'll again have to track this and see how what are the emerging trends and how computation is going to take place and acceptability between countries to help a global objective, meeting global objectives. But these ESG calculations, I shall go into a little bit more detail in a separate session. We don't have too much time for that here, but a quick overview on the required data for ESG. There's a Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. Scope 1 is direct emissions, which you have done yourselves. Scope 2 is purchased or procured, contracted, so that becomes indirect. And Scope 3 is upstream, downstream emissions. So there are, when you do your calculation, you have to look at not just Scope 1, but Scope 2 and Scope 3, which becomes extremely difficult. Scope 1 is more controllable and manageable. Scope 3 becomes much more difficult, but there are numbers and metrics available for this. So the greenhouse gases all become CO2 equivalents, carbon dioxide equivalents. So not that carbon dioxide is the only pollutant, there are other pollutants. These are the main pollutants. There are many others, there are hundreds actually, but all of them can be made into equivalents, CO2 equivalents, and that's why we use CO2 equivalents as the key metric for any greenhouse gases. Also, the life cycle of a greenhouse gas. So if a product at a point in time or in a balance sheet on a particular point of time, there is an emission, it need not be the case a year later or 5 years later. There is recycling factors, there is lifetime factors. For example, solar panels, they're being implemented globally, but what happens when they lose their lifetime? Maybe it's 100 years or 150 years from now or wherever. What's going to happen to all the solar panels? So you have to start thinking about life cycle and costs like that when you're looking at comparing apples to apples equivalent of any comparison. So this is a chart to help you start thinking in those terms. And this is a relative comparison between the different technologies for that. Over centuries, carbon, while it has a nature, there is carbon dioxide in nature. We breathe out carbon dioxide, all animals, everything. Any life has carbon emissions. But that has been, and there's a balance to that with trees and everything else in nature balancing that out. But in the last 100 to 200 years, the industrial growth, industrial era has accelerated this whole thing, and that's what the current pressure on all of this is. So over centuries, this has not been a problem, but it has started becoming a problem, and here's the evidence of some of that. So these are the CO2 metric emissions. There's the Earth temperature rise, and the prediction for whichever model you take, it's still going to go up. Any model of future prediction, and it's going to go up. And even the best case is not good. So these are Earth temperature prediction as rise. Likewise, global warming as a problem. Again, any prediction is not good, but there are measures and ways and means that's still not out of hand. So that's what a lot of the COP26 and other global bodies are discussing. So steps to arrive at GHG and COT is you have to get sources and make a list of all the sources and activities in your organization. You have to understand the emission factors, and then there's a global warming potential. How do you arrive at the equivalent CO2 equivalents? And then you can total this up. So this is where, in fact, I'm going to spend a little bit more time, but as Rispro, we can help you also get into the calculation side of how to arrive at GHG and CO2 equivalents for your companies. You better start the process because it might take 2, 3 years, 5 years to streamline and standardize the level of emissions that you really go through, especially when you look at Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3. In phase 1, you would have to look at Scope 1, but Scope 2 and Scope 3 emissions would also have to be brought into the calculation. So this is the calculation of, in the previous slide, I shared with you the GWB, how do we arrive at the global warming potential? So if you look at the GWB, what are the carbon equivalents? These are the equivalents. So some companies, industrial organizations, industrial pollutants will have to calculate this. So this is the CO2 equivalent, depending on your pollutant. There's a good calculator. All this you can do that. There's a link at the bottom which you can cut and paste or take it from the video or the PowerPoint or the presentation which we'll share with you. You can actually go online and get a quick You enter all this data and you'll get your CO2 equivalent from the EPA US website. So further factors around this are energy efficiency, energy conservation, fuel switching. So arriving at net zero is the way to go about that. So fossil fuels are the real culprit. We all know that. That's why we're all talking green climate change. There's a report card to help you move forward. So all this is about GHG emissions. Now, ESG standards, there are a number of them which are available to you. You could use very simple systems to start with, and then there is an emerging standard. These are the ISO standards emerging around social governance and compliance. ISO 26000 is one of them. I'm going through these so that you can go over this. These are too much in detail to be reading at this point in time. But these are the standards which you could look at. So if you pause your video, when you run this back, you can go through this and get details. If you want any information, text or implementation details, we'll be quite happy to share with you all these models. You could take a simple one like an ESG maturity model, which is similar to your capability maturity model in organizations. So these are a quick run through of the slides of what affects greenhouse gases. The school textbook, school level education, which everyone should know, but in case you missed it in school. So this is how the greenhouse effect affects us. This is the water cycle, and any interference, we are constantly interfering with these water cycles. Biofuel plant, once you put it into place, then you're taking the residue from agricultural waste or other agro waste, and you're converting that to energy. So waste treatment plants, all these become useful. This is a food security chain. So these are all applicable at an individual level, community level, and global level. So all these are, people are investing in those. Water. So water is a major problem in certain parts of the world. So freshwater availability is a factor. So people can play a part in the ESG space in these areas. In many parts of the world, water is not available all day, every day. Okay. In many places, the water is contaminated. There's also a cost to water which has started happening. We are all buying water. Most of us buy water, and we have put a price to it. And slowly that price is increasing. Even very complex systems use, which we need, like the Panama Canal, uses very efficient systems, but it's still wasteful. It's very interesting to look at some of these technologies and how they have conserved. Each of them is doing their bit for conservation. Energy is a major factor, our need for energy and how that's morphing. So this also affects how all planning is done around the energy requirements for companies. So these are the different types of energy. Energy measures which you have to get familiar with. We use joules to calculate this. So understanding some of these basics, as I said, this is schoolboy. There are new technologies emerging, which can also be very fruitful in the future. So these are sodium-cooled fast reactors, very small, compact nuclear reactors, which not nuclear, but using the same concept, reactor systems, which can generate very efficiency is very effective with those. Storage and batteries is becoming a key factor. So these are things which are happening. So storing heat with the new solar coolant system seems to be one of the most effective. So people are working on these. Waste management is something which you have to understand. Net zero versus low carbon emissions. So these are two options in terms of whether you emit carbon dioxide or you're able to remove them from the environment. Various technologies allow you to do these. Eventually, people have to do this. So there are a lot of careers and skills that are being developed around green and climate change. So these are some of the green skills that are emerging. Again, you can go back if you're into training and education. So these are some of the key jobs and functions that are required. Jobs are opening up. For example, the whole infrastructure, the US Congress is debating moving it to 3 trillion plus. A lot of that is going to go into green technologies and jobs in this area. So there's a huge thrust in the US for this, and obviously in India or anywhere else in the world, we're going to need more skilled labor around all of the all these skill sets. So the ESG related risks, are the key things that maybe is of interest to this group, and I've covered some of them. We'll get into more details. So the risk pro focus may be much more on the ESG risk part of it, but we have other specialists and experts within the group who can help you with other aspects of ESG. But probably starting with risk is a very good thing, because we find that enterprise risk management and ISO 31000 based system is excellent start to get into your ESG practice. So talk to us on this ERM part of it. So some of the topics for future discussions could be these. Okay, while ESG is a buzzword, so which are the things that interest you? Are you interested in carbon emissions calculations? Are you interested in there are going to be carbon credits, and those exchanges are going to emerge. ESG metrics, ESG rating, reporting and disclosure is something which we are good at Risk Pro, so we will be able to help you with that. Likewise for monitoring and verification and ESG audit. So starting from a risk perspective, eventually evolving to a good ESG values, ESG culture is what we would like to see in all of you. So these are some of our contacts if you need to do. Some of the organizations we interact with and who give us skill sets and other ways of actually helping you implement, not just advisory, getting you their rating, but we can take you to the next level, both in India and outside India as well. Because this is going to be a global effort. Anything to do with ESG is not going to be limited to India. So that's me and my details, so you can get in touch with me anytime. And so what's next? So you can share with us what you would like to cover. Okay, post-seminar, would you like in-person seminars, or get in touch with us in any which way that you feel. Ideally, send an email at least so that I know that you can, I mean, I know who's attended, who is showing interest in which area, and I'd like to interact with you on a one-on-one level. And of course, you could get in level with anybody, any of us at Risk Pro. And there are several others who can handle various aspects of the various things that we have discussed. So I'm done, Mona Lisa, so if you can